strange to watch politics from Mexico. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's all.
There you go.
The end, yeah. So, it's interesting because
Sorry.
I grew up in the South, and you know we're talkers. And so everything was about politics. And but the first thing I ever heard was about pigs. It was about pigs. Pigs, the president is killing pigs. And I was about 5 years old at the time, and I heard my grandfather talking about the president's killing pigs. Now, I like pigs. Why is the president killing pigs? And that was about 1939, I was born. And it was, coming out of the Depression, our very first really strategy, because it was about price controls. And coming, so that's the, okay, can you hear me now? Okay, I am loud enough. So it was interesting to me as to growing up in a very political family, always talking politics, as to why the president was killing pigs. But then later on, I began to realize that it was about price controls. And we were coming out of the Depression years. And of course, with Hoover, who was a non-president, Hoover was always down in Key West fishing. And so he wrote books on fishing. And so maybe that's why they named it the Hoover Dam, so they dam up the water so he would find more fish. But he was our non-president, you know, for all those years. And of course, if you remember, some of you, maybe, Hooverville.
Sure.
And that was in Washington, D.C., with hundreds and hundreds of jobless, homeless men setting up tents and outside. And nothing happened. I mean, he really was, as we've seen before, a president who did nothing. He wasn't even out on the golf course, as we know some presidents to be. So, and they named the Hoover Dam after him, maybe because he was damming up the whole economy. Who knows? But anyway, but I did want to say one interesting fact, trivia, that I found in just researching my speech and getting along. It had to do with Douglas MacArthur, General Douglas MacArthur. And of course, his famous remark, "I will return," and he never did. So, but talk about our generals, as Eisenhower and MacArthur and our other Millie now and whatnot. MacArthur went to West Point. He was a class of 1899.
Maybe just a little more.
Yeah, okay. And so his mother, if any of you know West Point, it's off the Hudson River, and as you turn up, it's on an incline up the hill. And as you're going up the hill from the Hudson River, there's the West Point Hotel. Now his mother rented a room in the West Point Hotel, having a window that she could watch her son in the dorm. She stayed there for 4 years.
It's a helicopter parent.
That's what I said. She was our very first helicopter parent. So I was always interested in growing up in the Second World War and having relatives in the war about MacArthur, but especially Eisenhower. And so as we were coming out, the Roosevelt strategy coming out of the Depression was what I consider, as far as I know, that we would all have some kind of involvement in it, either family or, if you're as old as I am, going through it, the very first strategy, which was the New Deal. And that was Roosevelt's New Deal to bring us out of the Depression. What's amazing to me about the New Deal, where it's been nearly 100 years since, we're still actually benefiting from some of the New Deal, like the Tennessee Valley Authority with water, and other federal projects that once in a while you'll run into without knowing about it, that is spread across. But of course, I think what the most amazing thing about him was that he did get people back to work and in the environment. For one thing, being a Floridian, one day, one weekend, my husband and I decided to take a kayak around Orlando. It's called Crystal Springs. And as we were taking the whole day floating down this river, my being a Floridian looked around and said, "This isn't Florida." There was kinds of bushes, shrubs, birds that did not belong to Florida. Well, it was part of the New Deal and part of the environmental project that Roosevelt had to bring all the flora and fauna in all of Florida into one space. And here it is, 100 years later nearly, and it's still part of our environment and things that should have been done and what we're dealing with now. So anyway, so Roosevelt was the very first president that I know that did have a strategy. And because before, I don't know of any other president. Even Lincoln had a problem with how to deal with the North and the South. And his strategy basically was merely a day-to-day situation. If any of you know, and we're hearing now the great kinds of Glenn Burry's documentary on Lincoln. But none of us lived at that time, so I think that I'm just talking about the times that we live in, that all of us should have experience from strategy. So then Truman comes along. And of course, you know his favorite remark? The buck stops here. And he wasn't interesting. He fell into the presidency kind of backwards, not expecting to be president. But come to find out now, after all these years since Roosevelt's death, Truman now is becoming, as far as presidential historians, one of our greater presidents because of what he did to bring us out of the World War II also. And he had to make the decision on dropping the atomic bomb. Now, I've been in other discussion groups where we've had that talk. Should we have dropped the atom bomb in Hiroshima? But it's interesting enough, we lived in Japan, and now married into our family is some Japanese. And it was really curious because, like living in Mexico, you begin to see the United States from another perspective. So living in Japan, it was, those Japs, which I found out from my daughter here, went to university, and she said there's all these Japs. That meant Jewish American princesses. And I thought it was a derogatory term at the time. But it is curious that, again, we didn't really know or understand until years after the war why Pearl Harbor. Why Pearl Harbor? We jumped into the war, and I remember when Pearl Harbor happened, and uncles and my big sister aunt joined the Army, and my uncles all joined the Navy and the Army, and we just didn't understand, why did the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor? And it takes years and years and years later till you study or have relatives who are Japanese to find out why. And that's the sad thing about our politics and our history. It's because Roosevelt knew that he was going to have to fight a war in Europe, and he needed the resources from the Philippines and those islands, which was rubber, oil, and all of those things. And so he put embargoes on those major ports in Southeast Asia. Well, Japan is an island nation, and so they were being isolated from their resources. And our attitude, unfortunately, as Americans, kind of like the Monroe Doctrine, as if we own all the Caribbean, and we own the rest of the world, and we can do anything we damn well please. So there was 2 Japanese liaison men from the government in Roosevelt's office trying to warn him that if he did not lift those embargoes, something bad was going to happen. And of course, it did. It did. And so the strategy came into conflict with the Southeast Asian countries. And so we moved on and pressed on, and we created a mess. And so parts of Roosevelt's New Deal and strategy we've been blessed with still the benefits of that, but some of it not. And a lot of it has to do with our image in the world and our attitude in the world as Americans. So when Truman comes along and put the buck stops here, because it was a difficult situation because of Japan. And so there's been lots of arguments, especially in my organization. One was, were we correct in dropping the bomb on Hiroshima? And then, why the second bomb on Nagasaki? Was that necessary? And these are the questions politically that I think should be part of political discussion groups. Because as you know, history repeats itself. And so we don't want a repetitive situation in that situation. So then we come into the quiet years of Eisenhower, and everybody seemed to take a breath, because you know what Eisenhower said in campaigning? He was going to get us out of Korea. And I had two brothers draft age, and that was the big, come on point. I'll stop the war in Korea. Which he did, because, of course, you know, the 39th parallel, and still after all these years, divided into two separate countries. But he was a great mediator. And Eisenhower, you know, his family came out of Western Pennsylvania, and they were all pacifists and Quakers and nonviolent. And it's interesting because he came from a family of 5 boys. Why? And you all have children, as I have more children than 2 sitting here, that go their path that they're going to go regardless of what you say. So Eisenhower was one of those people. And his mother, both his parents were teachers, and they had been moved to Kansas. And he was fascinated with one major book that's very famous. It's called The Art of War. But does anyone know about it? Sun Tzu? Sun Tzu.
The Art of War, yes.
The Art of War. I find it strange, because how can war be an art? And so I always found it interesting. Any of you football fans? Football fans. San Francisco 49ers? Yeah. Okay.
Baseball.
No, football.
I know.
The famous defensive linebacker, Ronnie Lott. His Bible is The Art of War. So it's even in use today. Because it is kind of strange that we end up looking at art as being part of humanity. And I don't ever believe that there would be total peace, eternal peace. It's sad, but I believe it seems to be in the nature of man. And the oldest game in the Western world is chess, which is basically war. And so it's just, the quiet years with Truman, so I just wanted to go back. That was 475 and 221 BCE, you know, before Common Era. And for 40 years, he was in it, and there was never, as a general, he never lost a battle. 40 years. But he said, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So that's quite an amazing thing. But as Eisenhower came in, one of the things that he said in his Chance for Peace 1952 speech to Congress was, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete pavement. We pay for a single fighter with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This is not a way of life at all. In any true sense, under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. And as a lobbyist in Washington, that hit me so true because I worked on the defense budget as a lobbyist. And the Department of Navy, Lockheed, was building a tremendous kind of transport plane to carry materials to different locations in Europe. The Department of Navy did not want it. Did not want it. And they said, we don't need it. We have enough. We have enough. This is how Washington works. Because Lockheed wanted that contract. And that's one of our biggest problems in government, is where the money is spent. And we can see that and hear it in Congress on the floor from senators and congresspeople who are pushing for their state to get those big contracts. So it's kind of a sad situation. But we're all old enough to have survived it. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about this problem of strategy and how, we can develop a strategy such with Democrats abroad. I mean, Democrats abroad is the 5th largest voting electorate in the country. I think more than 5 million voters Democrats abroad now. Yeah, and I don't think people realize that. Somewhere in there. And we're getting more of them here.
Let's applaud that.
Yeah.
Aspirationally, yes.
That's right. So our biggest problem, though, is, and I'm sure all of you've heard it from friends, parties, whatnot. Oh, I don't like politics, so I don't involve myself. We hear that all the time. And so my remark is, you get what you ask for. And then somebody says, politics is dirty. I've heard that a lot to me. Well, I say, why don't you get in and help me clean it up? Because unfortunately, if you look at state legislators, such as Georgia, other state legislators, who are those people who are running to be in a legislature? They happen to be realtors, lawyers, any profession that's going to promote their business. And it's not the common person, and that's what I go out and try to get people, because I think that the strongest area to work in and get the most satisfaction is on the state level, not the federal level, because you're not going to ever get in to see that senator. All the lobbyists are ahead of you. So, but the state level, you do have power. You really have power. And in Georgia, we have quite a lot of power, except some of the, unfortunately, is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Well,
How did that happen?
Well, I was dumbstruck because I looked up the county that she, did you?
No,
Do
you
know
told me. Tell
Floyd
the rest.
County. It's way up in the northwest section of Georgia, right across from Alabama, Tennessee. It is just huge mansions. The color, the Coca-Cola founders, and you drive in, it's just mansions. It looks like Westport, I was stunned. So I don't think those people know who they voted. So I'm just hoping now. But also, if any of you back in the States have volunteers that are going out to campaign, and one of the things when I was running for the legislature, which people so appreciated, that I went to their door and opened their door, and I talked to them, and they invited me in, because they'd never had anybody come directly to their door. And my big issue running was gun control. You can't believe how many people immediately said, put your sign up there. The police department all backed me. I had a lot of I got in very late. I really didn't want to win because you have more power behind the scenes than you do as an elected official. But I got in to throw a cabal, or maybe a monkey wrench inside a cabal. And they were upset I was running because the person they wanted in that place was going to go along with the governor. And one of the things was, New Mexico had passed a law that it was legal for psychologists to write prescriptions. Now, psychologists do not have medical background. So if we had a drug problem, can you imagine how much larger the drug problem would have been? So that's what I was out running on, 2 things, and I only had 3 months, but I did very well. But I said to my husband, after I was back in the legislature as a lobbyist behind the scenes with a lot more power than John Lewis, but I said, I had my husband come down to the legislature, and you know what they were arguing on the legislature? They were arguing legislation to mandate sweet tea be served in all Georgia restaurants. And I said, that's how silly things get. That's how silly things get. So, you know, I'm 85 now, so I just think, I don't know what to do anymore. And so, but you all are younger, so get out the vote, because the sad thing about gun control was I had 6 months ahead of time to get out on gun control in Georgia. I hit every single church of every kind, ethnic kind imaginable. Not one church would support the Million Mile March. Not one. The only thing across from the Capitol in Atlanta is a Methodist church, and they said they'd ring the bells at 12 o'clock that day for me. But I went to the MLK Center, the Ebenezer Church, and their new resource center, holding a meeting in the new center that took them. And I didn't have that many people turn out. But you know what happened? Just a week later, Martin Luther King's daughter led a march of 10,000 down Jackson Street against gay marriage.
Against it.
Against gay marriage.
So
That was more important
what
than
year
gun
was
control.
that? What more or less, what year was it?
In the 90s. In the 90s. So, you know, our priorities are just all over the place. And so, I'm able to, my daughter here from Boston, which is another planet, a lot of you know.
We're from San Francisco, you know.
Yeah. So the big problem in the United States is organizing, because I could easily, as I did in New York and New England, organize. California also organized, but the Midwest, Texas, the South, no. And of course, as you know, one of my big angers at Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, and she was just going into kindergarten at the time, he cut the education bill in half, fired all art and music teachers, and phased out phys ed programs, and then came along civics programs. And George Bush picked up on that. So that's why we have people, and I ask them, they don't even know what the 3 branches of government are. And when I ask them here, who are your 2 senators? And in one year, we were at LCS filling out our absentee ballots for it wasn't a presidential election, it was a midterm election. And there was a couple filling out their ballots sitting at the same table. And I said, oh, where are you from? And they said, Ojai, California. Now, I knew all the Congress people from California. I said, oh, but I don't know Ojai, it is a Republican, but I asked her, well, tell me, who's your congressperson? And I said, she gave me that dumb look that I'd seen on thousands of Americans' faces. She looked at her husband, he shrugged his shoulders, she turned back to me and said, oh, I don't think we have one. And I laughed, but that's the problem we have. That is the problem we have. So, you know, for all of you, get out the vote. Because the only way to stop violence in America now is because I organized that Million Mile March in 2000. I did get 70,000 out in Washington, And I did get the rest of the country out for that. That was 2000, 2000 year. Yes, it was. And so here it is, 2022. Not one piece of gun legislation has ever been allowed on the Congress floor because McConnell keeps it on his desk. And we've been totally unsuccessful. Totally unsuccessful. The only way we're going to be successful is vote. Get those bastards out of there. Okay, gracias.
Can we take a few